You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 175. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. Have you ever wished that you had a mentor? Somebody who was available to you 24/7, someone you could ask anything about your career, whether it's broad career strategy advice or how to deal with something tricky that came up at work. Well, if you have had that dream, then what if I were to tell you that you had access to that mentor today in the form of AI, in particular, ChatGPT? Now, I don't want to come across as a ChatGPT salesperson. That is 100% not my objective today. What I am hoping to do is to raise your awareness of a very powerful tool and to give you some ideas about how you can use it for career strategy and professional development as a lawyer. Now, this podcast episode will be relevant to you if you yourself are a lawyer and you're looking for some fresh ideas, some strategies for your own career development. And it is also relevant if you are a lawyer who's helping other lawyers with their career development, their strategy, for you to gain some mentorship and perhaps some coaching ideas. So I hope you love today's episode, and whether ChatGPT is something you've already been using and you're here to learn of a few tweaks and extra tips that you can use, or if you're starting from the very beginning and you've never even thought to use ChatGPT before, I hope this is one of those episodes where your mind is a little bit blown, where you realize the potential of the information that is at your fingertips and how you can translate that AI-generated information into actionable steps that you can use to really advance yourself professionally. So I'm thrilled to have you here today. I feel like this is going to be a super fun episode, and I'm really glad you've joined me. So thank you. Welcome. Now, why I'm interested in this topic in the first place is to give you a bit of background. I follow a lot of different coaches and trainers for my coaching practice. I listen to them. I get business advice and entrepreneurship advice, marketing advice, and that has led me to be part of trainings where ChatGPT has been brought into the equation. It's not something that I initially gravitated to. I think I'm probably a relatively slow adapter. But over the past few months, I have attended trainings where the instructors have said, hey, you can use ChatGPT to come up with 10 different titles for your next podcast episode, or how you can use ChatGPT to learn more about the client challenges, the challenges that your clients are facing. And the more I've learned about how to use ChatGPT in my own coaching practice, I've also seen ways to help my clients, my lawyer clients, use ChatGPT to enhance their practice. And that's really what I want to share with you today, is some of the ways that I've seen are relevant and applicable for ChatGPT to really enhance your career development. So I'm going to talk about 3 different topics today. Number 1 is some of the areas in which you can use ChatGPT for career strategy and professional development. I'm going to talk about some of the ways that you can use ChatGPT, so some of the search techniques that you might use if you've ever done legal research, which I expect all of you have. I know I did a ton of legal research as a student, and more particularly when I was practicing as a lawyer. Then you know how the quality of your search terms, the way you approach your searches, is going to determine the outcome, the relevance of the information that you elicit. So I'm going to spend a bit of time with some advice, some ideas for how to use ChatGPT to generate the most optimal results for you. And then finally, I'm going to share with you some of the limits on what AI can and cannot do for you. Now, I want to be really clear that I am not going to be talking about how you can use AI, ChatGPT to help you with anything that is substantive legal work. So I understand that you can use AI and AI-based tools to help with legal research, for example, document review, due diligence, contract drafting. That is beyond the scope of today's podcast. And so I just wanted to be clear about that what we're focusing on today is using ChatGPT in particular to help you with your career strategy and professional development. So with that, we're going to dive in. And what I'd love to do first is just tell you a little bit about ChatGPT based on what ChatGPT told me. So I thought, okay, what will happen if I type into ChatGPT, what is ChatGPT? How would you describe yourself? And here's the answer that I got. I'm an AI-powered assistant designed to provide personalized support, guidance, and information across a wide range of topics. I can help you with career development, professional growth, research, content creation, and problem solving by analyzing information, offering insights, and helping you develop strategies tailored to your needs. Whether it's legal career advice, writing, or answering specific questions, I'm here to assist with real-time, intelligent responses. So you'll see already from the definition that ChatGPT provided to me in response to the question of, who are you, ChatGPT, that already it has personalized its response to reflect the way that I am using ChatGPT. So I don't know how the AI does this, but it's clearly learned a lot about me. It knows how to answer this question. So if that seems a little bit freaky to you, then maybe ChatGPT isn't the answer for you. But if you're okay with that, then what I have to share might be really helpful for you. So I mentioned that there are 3 topics that we're going to cover. The first being, what are some of the ways in which you can use ChatGPT for your career development? And so I've got 3 areas, and I'll go through those in order. The first is general career planning. So as you might imagine, as a lawyer, whether you're first starting out or you're a few years in, or you are super senior and you're about to retire and you're just curious to know how this tool may help you, maybe in your retirement, or how it might have helped you when you were a more junior lawyer first starting out, you may use ChatGPT or AI to help you with your career trajectory, right? If you were to break your career up, for example, into segments, right? If you're a very, very brand new lawyer and you want to know what to expect at each level of your career development, you can use ChatGPT to generate a roadmap for you. Now, this might be really helpful because what I find for a lot of lawyers is that they come out of law school, right? You have gone through the process of getting into law school, passing all your required courses in law school. You've written the bar exam. If you're in Canada, then you've gone through your articling requirements, and then you become an associate. And depending on where you work, right? Some organizations, some firms will have a lockstep formula for you to follow. They will have a roadmap for the skills that you should be acquiring at each level of call, but many do not. And so you might feel like you've been thrown into the world of lawyering and you have no idea what to do next. So you can use ChatGPT to actually map out a career trajectory for you. You can ask it what you should be focusing on over the next 12 years, for example, of your career, what you should be doing at each stage in order to build your practice. So you can use this for overarching strategy. And some of the searches that you might put in, I've done this in real life. I've used this to create maps, at least in my mind, for some of the clients that I've been working with. Is, let's say you are a junior lawyer, you're 3 years into your practice as a corporate lawyer, you work at a law firm, and you know that ultimately you want to transition to go in-house. Well, you might ask ChatGPT. You might say, hi, ChatGPT, for a 3-year call corporate lawyer in Canada, let's say you're in Canada, who wants to go in-house, what are steps to take now to make a transition within the next 3 years? So this is a search that I plugged into ChatGPT and it generated a really great response. I'm not going to go into the responses that ChatGPT provided to me. That would take way too much time. But what you really need is to think about the searches, right? And the searches that you put into ChatGPT will be specific to you. Here's some examples of what I've used. Now, another lawyer that I've worked with recently is a relatively junior lawyer. They were, looking at different options for themselves. And it got me to thinking, what is the next step for this lawyer? When they land their first real job as a lawyer, what should they be thinking about? Not just for today, but for the long term. So I plugged in a search that was basically this: would you please help me design a career map for a newly called lawyer in Canada? The lawyer is a litigator interested in commercial litigation. They're working in a 30-person law firm with multiple practice areas. What steps should they focus on for their career development? Please organize those steps in 3-year increments under the headings you think are most appropriate, starting from 1 year up until year 12. Please provide your answer in bullet point to make it reader friendly. Thank you in advance. So you can see how, regardless of what stage you're at, you can start generating plans for yourself, career trajectories based on what ChatGPT creates in response to those types of searches. Another question that you might ask ChatGPT: how can you be an effective junior at trial? And what emotions can you expect? So that was a search that I plugged into ChatGPT. I had been talking to a lawyer about an upcoming trial. I did not share the responses. This was more of a curiosity for me. But you can see how ChatGPT can then give you a list, and it did, of things that you can do to be an effective junior, as well as some of the emotional challenges that you can expect. And I believe that was, stress, overwhelm, fatigue, avoiding burnout. So there were lots of really great suggestions. So I would invite you to think about what questions are on your mind when it comes to that broad career planning and maybe more isolated events that are coming up, whether it's a trial or a closing. And you're not asking ChatGPT how to do your job. You're simply consulting it for idea generation about some of the skills and road maps or milestones that you might want to think about at each stage of your practice, and perhaps use it more specifically for things like how to be an effective junior at a trial. Now, in this category, what I'm inviting you to do is to really think about that broad career strategy. And in addition to that, under this heading, although it's not entirely aligned, is that you can also use it for more discrete practice questions, right? So you might say, ChatGPT, what are your top time management tips for lawyers? You might say, hey, ChatGPT, I have a difficult conversation I need to have with a client. It's about an invoice. They think that the invoice is too high. I've reviewed it. I think it's fair. How can I approach that conversation in a way where I can be firm yet effective? You can even ask ChatGPT to provide you with some sample language. So these are all ways that you might use ChatGPT as your go-to, your mentor, that person that you consult when you need to have a little bit of advice. So that was section 1, right? How can you use ChatGPT? What are some of the topics you might use? That would be career strategy and also perhaps practice management. So the second area where ChatGPT can be really effective is in your marketing and business development. So I've seen a lot of coaches use this in the coaching space, and that's probably where I got the idea to use it in the lawyering space. So for lawyers that I work with, where you are looking for help when it comes to marketing, business development, raising your profile within your law firm, outside of your law firm, you might be thinking about your personal brand. You might be thinking of ways to network. A lot of lawyers run up against the problem of wanting to learn how to network while they themselves are introverts. What business development activities you can do if you don't want to be in a room full of people. This is a great time to reach into your computer and start asking ChatGPT for ideas. So I will provide my coaching clients with ideas based on what I have seen be effective, what coaching clients of mine have found to be effective. And what's really interesting is that you can also use ChatGPT to come up with a lot of different ideas. So on one level, you can use ChatGPT for market research, right? If you are a lawyer and you are, let's say, an IP lawyer and you do a lot of work with startups, you might ask ChatGPT what challenges startups often face that you can help them with as an IP lawyer. You might think about other ways in which you could learn more about your clients using ChatGPT in order to identify ways in which you can help them. Now, you could also use ChatGPT to think more specifically about strategies and networking ideas. So, for example, let's say you're an IP lawyer, you work at a national law firm, you might ask ChatGPT, what are some ways that I can increase my profile? Now, you might narrow down your search to raise your profile internally within the law firm, or you might ask it to narrow down that search to external clients, right? End users of your legal services. You might also put a search into ChatGPT. I work at a small law firm in a rural area. I practice family law. What are some ways I can reach potential clients? You might even narrow that down. Reach those clients online or reach those clients in person. You might also use ChatGPT to generate ideas for topics. And those topics might be for a presentation that you're delivering, or an article that you would like to write, or a blog post you're doing for your law firm. And so you might tell ChatGPT, hey, ChatGPT, I'm writing an article or a blog post about constructive dismissal. What are some topic ideas? So the idea here is to be thinking about how ChatGPT can be a source for you, a resource for you for idea generation when it comes to some of the things that you want to do in the realm of marketing and business development. I've given you some ideas, and hopefully by listening to the ideas that I've suggested, you're also thinking about ideas that are specific to you, to your practice, to your style of business development, to topics that come up for you and your clients, and ways that you can use ChatGPT to enhance and expand upon your original ideas. Now, finally, the third area where you might be using ChatGPT, and these are not by any means intended to be the only ways that you can use ChatGPT for career strategy. These are just the ones that I have chosen to discuss today. The third category is job transition. Now, we talked about this a little bit in the broader picture under that first heading, career strategy, right? If you know today that you want to go in-house and that will happen in the next 3 years, for example, then you're going to use ChatGPT in a more prospective way. Sometimes it's really helpful to use ChatGPT or AI in the more immediate context of job interviews. So this has come up recently with lawyers who are interviewing. And one lawyer in particular asked me, hey, what kind of questions do you think I can expect to hear at this particular job interview? So I thought, okay, well, I have a few ideas myself, but what does ChatGPT have to say about this? So I plugged in some search terms, and ChatGPT gave a response, some questions that it would expect could be posed at an interview. It also had a really helpful section about why these questions were being asked and what the employers were looking for. So what you might ask it, for example, let's say you're a brand new lawyer and you're interviewing for a job. It's one of your first jobs. You might ask ChatGPT, what questions can a newly called lawyer ask a prospective employer during a job interview? Now, it would be helpful for you to narrow down that search if you're applying for a litigation position, for example, or a solicitor position, or a position in family law or bankruptcy. So the more you can narrow down what it is that you're doing, the more specific ChatGPT can be in terms of providing a response. So you can ask ChatGPT about questions for an informational interview, right? Maybe you don't have an interview, a formal interview for an existing job yet, but you're doing a lot of coffee dates and informational interviews. You might ask ChatGPT for some ideas on questions that they might expect to ask, how you can set up your informational interview, maybe even some sample language for how you might write an email. It would probably give you an answer to that. I haven't run that specific search myself. You can think about interviews, questions that you might be asked. It might also be really helpful to help you generate questions that you can ask. I always think it's good to go into an interview with questions on your mind, what you want to learn about the firm or the organization where you are interviewing. And sometimes you'll have a few ideas in mind about what it is that you want to know, but sometimes you don't know what you don't already know. And so ChatGPT can be really helpful in helping you see that maybe there are questions that you could be asking that you didn't even think to ask, but now that they're on your radar, you can make that decision whether or not it's something that you do want to ask. You might ask it for examples of behavioral type questions. So you've probably heard of that term, behavioral questions. Those are questions that interviewers will ask you to learn a little bit more about you and how you approach particular problems. There is a STAR method that is the sort of gold standard of responding to behavioral questions. So STAR stands for situation, task, action, and result. So that's a framework that you can use when you're responding to those types of questions. So you might ask ChatGPT to generate a list of behavioral questions. You might even then go that next step and respond to one of those questions. And then you can even plug your answer into ChatGPT and say, hey, ChatGPT, I'm responding to this behavioral question. Can you analyze it from a STAR perspective and let me know maybe what I did well and what's missing here. And ChatGPT will respond to your question. So those are some ways that you might be using ChatGPT to help you with a job transition. So interview questions, responses to questions, what you can expect. Again, there may be more broad questions, more career strategy questions that you've been asking. There might be networking questions that you've been asking, but you can see as we go through these different examples how ChatGPT can be a useful resource for you, right? It can be a mentor for you, somebody that you can turn to at any time of day and ask for their opinion, ask for their answers to your questions. So the second thing that I'd love to talk with you about, the first thing we talked about were some areas where you can use ChatGPT. So again, career strategy, we talked about marketing and business development, and we talked about job transitions, so that job searching process. The second category that I'd like to speak with you about today is techniques. So how can you effectively search using ChatGPT? And I've already given you some examples of searches that you can put into ChatGPT, ways that you can build on those searches to make them more specific. So some of this may be a little bit repetitive of what we've already gone through. And chances are you've got your own search techniques that you will find to be effective. But here are some to get you started or maybe offer some ideas that you haven't yet been using. So one tip. Oh, and before I dive into that, I thought I would also mention questions, right? Questions are key. I love questions. I've always been a curious person, and I also love closing questions. So if you ask me to find something, I will have a really hard time stopping before I've found it. I think this is why, as a child, I was always the person in my house that would be asked to find the missing keys, the missing ring, the missing pair of socks, the remote control, because people knew that if they asked me, I would find it. It also helps that I have a bizarre photographic memory for all the odds and ends. Believe me, this is translated into my current house. My mother used to call me Polly Finder, and that seems to have stuck because now I am finding all of the random things in our house, except for one remote control that has gone missing, which if we ever find it, I will let you know. Anyhow, questions. Questions are key. So the types of questions that you ask, if you are a research lawyer, for example, and you're using certain search engines, then you know that the way that you build search is important, right? It will help you to narrow down your search, to expand your search, to control what type of information is coming back to you. As a coach, I also know that the questions that I ask are really important. For example, when a coach is asking a question, they are encouraged to use what as the beginning. What is important to you about X? Because what apparently has the effect of bringing your brain forward. You start thinking in the future and what you're going to do or how this is relevant versus using why. Why is that important? Apparently, that will turn your brain more into a backward reflective state. Why is this important? What has happened in the past that makes this important? It's a subtle nuance, but it's one that I'm very conscious of when I'm asking questions of a client in a coaching conversation, when I use what and when I use why. Sometimes I will use why, and it's strategic. So the way that I frame questions is very well thought out. I'm asking questions for a particular reason. And so when it comes to your searches, when you're engaging with ChatGPT or some other form of AI, you want to be mindful about the questions that you're asking. So questions, when you're using ChatGPT, one question that you can ask ChatGPT is, how can I use you to help me? So I plugged this question in to ChatGPT in preparation for today's podcast episode. What are ways I can use you to help me as a lawyer with career and professional development? So you might ask ChatGPT, what are some of the ways that you can help me? Now, chances are you'll want to be more specific, right? Give ChatGPT more information if you're comfortable giving that information, right? You might let it know, I'm a 5-year call, I'm a 10-year call, I work in commercial litigation, I'm a solo practitioner, I'm part of a 200 plus law firm. So you want to give ChatGPT information because then it will be able to tailor the responses that it is providing to you in order to answer your questions. Now, you may also want to be specific about how you want ChatGPT to respond to your questions. So, for example, you might say, ChatGPT, will you please provide the top 10 strategies for time management for lawyers? That way, ChatGPT knows to narrow the response that it gives you to the top 10 results. You might ask for bullet points for answers. Now, I think it typically responds in bullet points, but you might want to specify that. You might want to put a word limit on how they are responding to you, right? Can you make your response 300 words or less? Now, you might also, and this is what I just recently learned, which I think is brilliant, you might ask ChatGPT to tell you what questions it thinks that you should ask, right? So you might be telling ChatGPT about something that you're working on. Again, I'm not thinking about substantive legal work. I'm thinking about, a marketing strategy, for example, or maybe questions that you have about your career. Maybe ChatGPT can help you with some of the questions. So I did type that in. I asked it some questions and it provided a really interesting list of questions. I'm now going off my memory, which is not helping. But I think I asked it about career questions, right? What are some of the questions that I should be asking myself at this stage of my career? So you could ask ChatGPT that same thing. I also like to use ChatGPT, and this is probably where I've used it the most in my practice, is to run a search to see what I may have missed. So I've done this before for podcast episodes, for example. I've actually asked it to write podcast episodes just to see what turns up. I've never used the ChatGPT podcast episodes. Maybe one day I will. But so far I haven't. But I will use it to see if there's anything else that maybe I could include in a particular topic. So you might use that. Maybe you come up with 5 different ideas for networking, and then you run a search on ChatGPT to see what else ChatGPT comes up with. You can also prepare your materials and then share them with ChatGPT and see what ChatGPT tells you about those materials. So I actually did that with today's podcast episode. I wrote an outline. I had a number of bullet points. I always do this, almost always. It's on a document. And so I took that content, I plugged it into ChatGPT. I said, here is my outline for a podcast episode that I'm writing about how lawyers can use ChatGPT to help them with career strategy and professional development. Will you please tell me what I'm missing? And so ChatGPT did provide me with a response of what I was missing. And a couple of things. There was quite a long list. I won't go and read through that list. It pointed out that I was not talking about how lawyers can use ChatGPT in their practice. So things like legal research, document discovery, contract drafting, and I left that out on purpose. So I thought it was interesting that that's what ChatGPT provided back to me. It also mentioned ethics and confidentiality. So that is a really good point. I thought about ethics and confidentiality. I'm not sure how applicable it is here. I know when I do searches, for example, that relate to real clients, I never share anything that has any way of tracing my search back to that person. I always leave it generic enough that nobody would ever be able to trace it back. When I provide my own personal information, I'm not putting in anything that I'm concerned about. It's usually, again, fairly generic. In terms of the ethics, there may be some questions there in terms of usage of ChatGPT information or technology. If you're an IP, IT, ChatGPT savvy lawyer, you would be able to tell me a lot more about that than I currently know. But those are things that you might want to think about when it comes to ChatGPT. So for example, in my mind, if I'm asking ChatGPT for some ideas about, networking events that maybe I could sign up for, or strategies, I don't see that as something that I would be concerned about. But I would be concerned about asking ChatGPT to write an article for me and then posting that online. That I would feel would be potentially coming into some questions about, who owns the copyright, etc. So moving on then, be sure to thank ChatGPT. So somebody told me, and maybe it's true, that you should be nice to ChatGPT. You should be thankful. And so I treat ChatGPT much like I would a person, and I thank them for their comments. I thank them for their feedback. I give them positive encouragement because it's helpful and it certainly doesn't hurt anybody. And ChatGPT will often have a nice little response for me too. And so why not, right? It doesn't hurt anybody. So first category then that we talked about today were some of the substantive areas where you can use ChatGPT to help with career development. The second, I've provided you with some ideas in terms of how you can use different techniques for searching. So different ways to approach questions, different ways you can use it to maybe check your work or come up with additional ideas. And then finally, I'd love to share some of the limits of ChatGPT or AI when it comes to career strategy and professional development. So first and foremost, and this is not going to be a surprise, but you must exercise human discretion. So this is actually not that much of a stretch, right? If you had a real life mentor who was giving you advice, you would still want to filter that advice through your own lens and decide whether or not to act on that advice. If you have a coach that you're working with and they are offering suggestions, you are going to want to pick suggestions based on what works best for you. So in any context where you're looking to some external source for information and ideas, you're always going to want to apply your own discretion, your human discretion over whether or not to go forward with something. You probably also want to apply your discretion over what is truly applicable, right? So for example, when I asked ChatGPT to provide feedback on the notes for my podcast today, it brought up that I had missed this category of using ChatGPT or AI for legal research and contract drafting and substantive legal work and how that could be helpful for lawyers. I left that out on purpose. And so you don't want to buy into any information that is just provided to you and assume that it is correct and relevant and applicable to you. You always want to be that person who's exercising their judgment and deciding what applies, what doesn't. If you need to investigate something further, you do that investigation and satisfy yourself as to the accuracy of whatever information it is that you are looking into. So that is probably the biggest limit, is that it requires your judgment. It requires your discretion. Any information that is provided to you isn't the instruction manual where we don't question it. It is simply a resource for you, and I encourage you highly to treat it that way. Second limit, I think, is volume. It is so easy and so fast for ChatGPT to spit up a very large amount of information, and then you are going to need to triage that information. So the volume alone of what you can get from AI is itself potentially overwhelming. And so you will need to identify the most relevant information and find ways for that information to work for you instead of against you. You can imagine having so much information that you don't know where to start. And so you'll want to develop skills, and it may be that you're triaging using ChatGPT to narrow down the search results. Maybe you ask it to prioritize the search results in terms of what is most important. You might do that yourself. You might go through a list and say, okay, well, what really matters most here? What is relevant to me? What isn't? But volume could be a very big problem, especially if you're like me and you like running different searches. And next thing you know, you've got so much information. Where do you start with that? And that leads us to another challenge, which is implementation, right? You can generate all the information in the world and it will be useless to you if you're not actually implementing anything, right? You might know the top strategies for time management, but if you're not actually following them, you may not be making any progress in time management. You can know everything there is to know about business development for lawyers, but if you're not out talking with people, if you're not speaking with lawyers at your firm, if you're not building relationships with your clients and potential clients, if you're not doing legal work that then they love and has them singing your praises and coming back for more, then you're not going to be able to implement in the real world the tips and strategies that are being suggested through this AI. So you want to be mindful that implementation is where the rubber hits the road, and that can be a real challenge. AI can't do that for you. At least it can't do it for you yet. And so you need to be mindful about implementing the strategies that you decide are the ones that are most effective for you. That leads to another point, which is that ChatGPT AI is no substitute for real IRL human relationships. So by that, networking opportunities, right? Developing relationships with your mentors, developing relationships with sponsors, people who are going to help advocate for you professionally and provide you with opportunities for growth and career advancement. It's not a substitute for coaching. If what you need is someone who can help you, someone like me who can help you with the implementation, it may not be able to help you with that. You might need a real person to have that relationship with who can help you to translate ideas into action. It's not a substitute for counseling, for example. If you're going through a difficult time, if you're finding stress to be overwhelming, then you might need support from a professional who can engage with you in a one-to-one. So there are limits, and that personal touch, that personal interaction is, of course, a limit to AI. And then finally, I put this in and it had a little smiley face next to it, limit to free searches. So I've just been using the free version of ChatGPT. I guess I asked a lot of questions in a short period of time in preparation for today's podcast episode. And so it timed out and it said you can't run any more searches until 6:30 p.m. or you can sign up for our paid option. So I haven't done that. I'm considering it because there probably are numerous ways that I can start using ChatGPT to enhance what I do day to day. But for now, I've been using the free program. And if you're using the free program, then one of the limits might be that you run out of searches. So you might have to be strategic in how you use it. I asked ChatGPT for some limits and it came up with a list as well. So that list is lack of personal experience. ChatGPT is not a substitute for human expertise. It said it had limited real-time insights. So the cutoff for the sort of the data dredge was September 2021. And so there's very little new that has come in through since then. And so if what you're searching up requires more real-time information, there may be some limits there, at least as of the recording of today's podcast episode in, September 2024. The information is generalized. So if what you're looking for is something that is more specific and tailored, there might be limits there. ChatGPT said it might miss out on industry-specific nuances. It might miss out on local and cultural context. It is not able to provide emotional support, although I would say that I get a lot of joy from using ChatGPT. I find it quite heartwarming when it says nice things to me. And so, I guess it's not providing emotional support in the way that true friendship or a counselor or a coach or a mentor or someone in real life could provide that emotional support. But, if you have nothing else, I think it's not terrible. And then unintended biases. So that has been built in. I thought that was a really interesting point. So those are some of the limits that ChatGPT has pointed out for itself. So we've now gone through everything that I wanted to share today. I realize I could go on much longer, but lucky for you, lucky for me, I'm going to wrap it up with those points. And, if this is an interesting topic for you, then I would love to hear from you and feel free to reach out with questions or share with me how you have been using ChatGPT for professional and personal development, for career strategy, or what other uses you find it really helpful for. So again, I think the biggest challenge that you will find if you have not been using ChatGPT, and this has been one of those mind-blowing experiences where you now realize the resources that are available to you at your fingertips, then you might be thinking, okay, that's great. I'm going to go out and use it. One of the challenges you might find, again, I've alluded to this already, is just volume, right? That there is so much information out there. You might feel overloaded. You might feel overwhelmed. And instead of having this great resource, you now just feel like it's too much. And so you do nothing with it. So for that reason, I encourage you to use it as a tool, right? It's a way of generating ideas. It's that first cut of ideas. It's a starting point to set you up for the next step. And that step really is the triage, right? That's to figure out what's really important to you there and then to implement only those things that you think will work best for you, and to do that strategically, right? Have a way of mapping it out, having timelines that don't require you to do everything all at once, but to pace yourself. I encourage you to learn how to make AI work for you. This is a technology that is not going away. So the more we can learn to engage with it and leverage it and interact with it, the more you'll be able to find ways of searching effectively. I also encourage you to think about what you're searching, right? I think our questions reveal a lot about ourselves. And so when you sit down to ChatGPT and think about what do you want to know about your career, that can be really telling, right? And you might take that first step of asking questions of ChatGPT, but then those questions become ones that you ask the people in your real life, the mentors, the coaches, the colleagues, the clients. And so that's a real indicator to you, right? Noticing in yourself what you are curious about may lead to some really interesting answers. And finally, I would invite you to consider having support, right? Whether it's working with a coach like me or having a mentor or a friend, an accountability partner who you might work with to start implementing some of what you learn so that you're translating, you're crossing over that threshold of information to action. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I think that this is a really, really useful resource, a wonderful tool that lawyers can use to enhance career strategy and professional development. I hope that this episode has been a fun one for you, that you've found inspiration in some of the ideas that we've been talking about, that some of the example searches that I gave you give you ideas for how you can set up your own searches for your own professional development. And as I mentioned, if you like this idea, if you would like help to implement some of the ideas that you're learning about career transitions or planning for the future or time management or how to use AI for more effective business development, then by all means, feel free to reach out to me. I would absolutely love to hear from you. I think this is a super fun topic. And as you know, I love supporting lawyers just like you in their practice, and anything that we have to help ourselves do that better, faster, more effectively, I'm 100% all in. So thank you so much for joining me here today. It's been a pleasure to chat with you. Thank you, ChatGPT, for all your input in today's podcast episode. And for all of you, I just wish you so much fun and success and inspiration, and hope that you really thrive in your career and that you're able to leverage all the tools that are available to you. Thank you so much, and see you next week. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. For instructions on how to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com/podcast launch. See you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.